The chairperson of Eskom has applied for an exemption and the Minister of Finance has granted it. An important question that everyone is asking is whether this is an opportunity for looting or whether it's something legitimate. Now, here's some relevant background. When the COVID-19 national state of disaster was in effect, there was a lot of looting because all of the normal oversights that would exist no longer existed. So we saw massive tender fraud. Royal Butler, the tender was worth 125 million. Digital Vibes came at a cost of 150 million. The school fumigation scandal came at a cost of 431 million. And that's just to mention some of the most well-known tender fraud that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic, where there was a national state of disaster. So we know that on the 9th of February, there was a declaration of a national state of disaster under the Disaster Management Act for the electricity supply constraint issue. We also know that on the 23rd of February, the Eskom CEO, Andre de Ruyter, made damning allegations that 1 billion rands a month is lost through criminal corruption at Eskom, which is an annual cost of 13 billion rands. In addition, in the 2021 financial reports that were submitted by Eskom, there were losses that were of the following amounts, totaling 14.5 billion. Let's go through the numbers. Irregular expenditure from Eskom, 11.7 billion. Fruitless and wasteful expenditure, 1.3 billion. Losses from criminal conduct, 2.5 billion. In total, that's 14.5 billion. So we know on the 9th of March, this is what was actually applied for by Eskom. The chairperson of Eskom, Paul Makwana, applied for the following: an exemption from Section 552, B1, 2, and 2 of the Public Finance Management Act, and departures from Treasury Regulations 28.21 and National Treasury Instruction number 4 of 2022-2023, not to disclose the following in their annual financial statements. And it's quite a bit. You know, the headline that we've been seeing has just been looking at just one element, but they actually requested 3 things. Number 1, exemption from disclosing any material losses through criminal conduct and any irregular and fruitless wasteful expenditure that occurred during the year. That's number 1. Number 2, any criminal or disciplinary steps taken because of such losses or irregular expenditure or fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And number 3, any losses recovered or written off from irregular expenditure or fruitless and wasteful expenditure. This is in their documents right here. If you look carefully, you'll see beyond my notes that those are actually the letter that was responded to by the finance minister. So let's define some of these terms just in case you are not familiar with them and what they mean. Irregular expenditure. Irregular expenditure is expenditure that was not incurred in the manner prescribed by the legislation. In other words, somewhere in the process that led to the expenditure, the auditee did not comply with the applicable legislation. And then critically, it is an indicator of non-compliance in the process that needs to be investigated by management to determine whether it was an unintended error, negligence, or done with the intention to work against the requirement of legislation. Such legislation requires, for example, that procurement should be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. That's the first one. Now, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Section 1 of the Public Finance Management Act defines fruitless and wasteful expenditure as expenditure which was made in vain and would have been avoided if reasonable care had been exercised. The words "in vain," as contained in the definition of fruitless and wasteful, refers to a transaction, event, or condition which was undertaken without value or substance and which did not yield any desired results or outcome. Reasonable care means applying due diligence, careful application, attentiveness, caution to ensure that the probability of a transaction, event, or condition not being achieved as planned is managed to an acceptable level. These are the definitions of what we are dealing with. So let's talk about the consequences of these exemptions. Is it a looting opportunity or is it legitimate? I actually think that once you relax and once you provide an exemption for 3 years, what's going to happen is that the auditees will not take reasonable care to prevent fruitless and wasteful expenditure, meaning that it's more likely to occur. Number two, the investigations that are required when you have irregular expenditure will no longer occur because people have a lot of work to do in general. They're busy, they've got work to do. And people avoid difficult work that could lead to them being fired, that could lead to them not being promoted or even killed. So if you've already given an exemption, what's the likelihood that people will actually investigate and take seriously these particular things? Thirdly, I think that this introduces a moral hazard. What's a moral hazard? In economics, the term moral hazard refers to a situation where a party lacks the incentive to guard against a financial risk due to being protected from any potential consequences. That's fundamentally what this is. Fourthly, bad actors, the people who are currently looting Eskom for 2.5 billion criminally every year, the people who are participating in all of the current wasteful expenditure. This is a declaration of Christmas for them. It's a wozani bonke, wozani nonke type of situation for them, because now you're saying to them, we're not going to check for 3 years. 3 years. Eat, enjoy, feast upon Eskom. That's basically what this is saying. Now, why not solve the problems? You know, I'm very perplexed with this because Mpomakwana was the chairperson of Eskom of Nedbank from 2011, I think until 2022 or 2021, thereabouts. That's a very high financial management position. It's one where you apply all of the strict protocols. So to then have somebody who comes from the banking sector saying, let's relax all of these protocols. And these are the reasons that he put in the letter. He said that there are inadequate systems of control to timeously detect and record irregular and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. There are inadequate controls to ensure completeness of an assessment of expenditure linked to transgression of supply management processes, investigations, and tracking of internal audit and forensic findings. There is lack of supporting documentation to substantiate adjustment of opening balances and to record complete and accurate losses linked to criminal conduct. And finally, there's the use of outdated methodology for the estimation of non-technical losses. These are the reasons why they're saying this. And they're saying that the risk that they want to avoid is the risk of a qualified audit and making debt harder to secure later for Eskom. But if you're coming from a financial background, if you're coming from Nedbank, surely these are things that you can fix. I mean, this letter was sent on the 9th of March, approved on the, let me just check the date here that this letter was approved on. I think on the 30th of March, this letter was approved. So the 31st of March. So this was approved just a few weeks after. Why isn't the priority to fix what's wrong at Eskom in terms of all of these financial reporting lines? When you take this together with the fact that you have a national state of disaster, where you are more likely to have approvals of tenders without real oversight, and the fact that Eskom is not then going to check or report after the fact, I mean, come on. Come on. It's so obvious that this is going to just open the floodgates. And it makes you wonder, because Eskom has been the site of state capture for so long. If state capture is really an important thing that must end, why would anybody pursue this? What do you think? Let's have a conversation.